I'm pleased to introduce our 2019 Teacher of the Year, Allison Townsend, and she will be providing reflections from her role. Allison, if you would please come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Allison Townsend. I'm a third grade teacher at Barnwell Elementary School and Fulton County Schools, and I'm so honored to represent as Georgia's 2019 Teacher of the Year. First of all, I would like to take a moment to thank the Georgia Partnership sincerely for inviting me to speak with you all today. You know, the most common question that I get from people in this role is, so what's the best thing about being the Georgia Teacher of the Year? And you'd probably expect that to be a pretty difficult question to answer, because since taking on this role last summer, it's been nothing short of life-changing. I've been fortunate enough to take part in once-in-a-lifetime experiences, and I've been given this incredible platform to share my message with the world. But the best thing about being the Georgia Teacher of the Year, hands down, has been all of the people that I've gotten to meet along the way. So thank you again to the Georgia Partnership for welcoming me into your family and inviting me to share my voice and letting me collaborate with you guys all on the incredible work that you are doing for our students and our teachers all across Georgia. My one wish would be that all Georgia teachers could sit in on one of the board meetings to hear how they're not only discussing challenges, but the solutions to those challenges that we face in the classroom every single day. The other group that I would like to thank is every one of you who's here with the media today. One thing that I always say is that transparency is the key to success in a classroom. But that's also true about education as the whole. We have to be transparent. Education has changed drastically from the time that we were all in school. Our classrooms look different. Our challenges that we face as educators are different as well. But in spite of this, many adults, including community members, politicians, parents, have not had the opportunity to see what it looks like in the 21st century classroom. So because of that, I think that there are often misconceptions that come from people thinking that education either looks exactly the way it did when they were in school, or having these ideas that it's something totally different than what it is. And that can lead to ineffective policies, disagreements, and frustration with the education system. But the good news is that there is a simple solution. As an educator, I believe it is my duty to provide society with an updated view of what my classroom looks like and what teaching and learning looks like in the 21st century. And everyone here today who works in the media can help us with that mission as well. Because when you help educators and community members and everyone get on the same page, we can provide the best possible opportunities for our children. So thank you so much for being here to help us accomplish that today. When thinking about what I wanted to speak about today, I looked over countless data points. I looked at scores. I looked at statistics that I could reference to while making my points. But then I realized after all of the incredible speakers that you've already had so far today, they would have already told you a lot of those points. And you would already have a very solid idea of what the data is saying about education in Georgia in 2019. I also started to think about the reasons why I came into education myself. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't because of educational data or even raising test scores. I don't know a single educator who got into the job because of that. We do this job because we love kids. We do this job because we care about the future and we want to make it better. We do it because we want to inspire, connect, and dream. We want to help create lifelong learners. And we want to be responsible for building something that is bigger and better than just ourselves. That is why we teach. With that being said, I'm by no means against assessing our students and gathering data on our schools. My point is that these numbers should be byproducts of a great education, not the goal. I believe these numbers can be excellent tools for measuring our growth and for setting goals along the way, but they don't tell the whole story of what's happening in our schools. To get that whole story, you have to go inside the walls of our schools. You have to speak with our teachers, and you have to look into the eyes of our students. As a teacher, one of the biggest lessons I have learned during my time is that the grades my students earn on paper don't always reflect that child as a whole, and it doesn't always reflect how successful their year may have been. A couple years ago, I had a student in my class, his name was Devin, and I had a student in my class whose name was Aaliyah. While Devin was failing every single subject, Aaliyah had straight A's. But here's the thing. Devin was hands down the hardest working student I have ever worked with. On top of that, he was responsible and respectful. He was caring and empathetic. He was the type of kid that when the right thing had to be done, you could depend on him. And I think back on that year and how anytime a student was upset, Devin was the first one there with his arm around their shoulder, comforting them and helping them to feel better. You know, his scores may not have reflected it, but he grew so much that year, and I was so proud of the person that he was. And then I also had a student named Aaliyah. Now, for Aaliyah, school came easy, but friendships did not. She was different than the other kids and would often have anxiety attacks. I could tell that things weren't always great at home. And when I spoke with her, it was like there was a certain sadness in her eyes. At the end of the year, Devin failed the Georgia milestones, and Aaliyah passed with flying colors. But as we know from their stories, that it paints a totally different picture of these students. Looking back on that year, I'm so proud of the work that we accomplished with Devin, how much he grew. And since then, he's qualified for special education services, and he's receiving the help he needs. I know he will go through life successful. But when I think back about Aaliyah, I have this pit in my stomach and this worry that there could have been something more I could have done for her. I feel like something we all could have done for her, and I still worry about her to this day. Well, our schools are the same way. I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to visit many different types of schools, and just like we've been hearing all day today, there are challenges with every school, and there are beautiful, amazing, incredible things happening at every single school around Georgia. But one thing I've gotten the opportunity to do is kind of see behind the curtain of what's actually going on at these schools. And in some cases, I've been to schools that have extremely high CCRPI scores, and they're almost paralyzed with fear of that score dropping, so much so that their focus is just on maintaining that score. And they don't have the room or the time to invest in growing or trying new things for their students. At the same time, I've gone to schools with lower scores where their teachers are teaching with so much passion. They're innovating and risk-taking, building relationships with their students, and you just know that they're growing. They're also combating issues that come from outside of the school, like poverty. So my point is this: all of the data we collect in education is essential and can help us set goals and measure growth. But every student and every school is so much more than a number. There are greater stories just waiting to be told. Today we have learned about challenges we face in education here in Georgia. More importantly have been the conversations around solutions to these problems. The next step is spreading the message to the people who can make it happen for our students. Because at the end of the day, people are our greatest resource. That sentence right there is worth repeating. People are our greatest resource. First and foremost are the educators that work with our students every single day. Not only am I talking about our teachers and administrators, but about our support staff, our paraprofessionals, custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, and everyone in between. These are the people on the front lines of education. These are the faces our students are seeing every single day. And these are the people that we have to invest in. I know one major issue happening in Georgia and across the country is about teacher retention. And at the end of the day, it boils down to one big idea. Valued people stay. When teachers feel valued, when they feel appreciated, and like they are fulfilling their purpose that they set out to do from the beginning, they stay. When I say that people are our greatest resource, I'm not just speaking about the people inside the building. I'm also talking about everyone in our community as well. When our communities are succeeding, so are our schools. It is important to remember that schools are not bubbles. Kids bring with them what is happening in their communities into the school, and they also take with them their experiences from school back out to their communities. Now, this can be a positive or negative thing depending on the relationship between the schools and the communities in which they serve. We need to make sure that we are forming strong partnerships between the two so that they can succeed together. And finally, when I say that people are our greatest resource, I'm speaking about each and every single one of you in the media as well. You each have a platform that can be used to help share our voices, and we need you. In many ways, you are often the link between educators and the community. So please, please come help us tell our stories, because when we work together, kids will win every single time. So thank you so much for the opportunity to address you all. At this time, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have for me. But don't all speak at once. Yes?
So do you do any mentoring for incoming teachers?
Yes. So I work for Fulton County Schools, and we do have like a mentoring program at our school that we do. On top of that, I just read this great blog post from Cult of Pedagogy that kind of goes beyond just a formal mentorship program. The idea is that all new teachers, but really I think all teachers and probably all of us, whether we're in education or not, we need to surround ourselves with what they like to call marigolds. And what they mean by this is that when a gardener is planting, oftentimes they'll plant like a vegetable next to a marigold because it'll help them grow stronger than it would if they were alone. In school, these are the people that we want near our new teachers. So not only am I saying we need to have mentorship programs with the best educators, but we also want those people that are going to remind our new teachers why they love the job, why they love the kids, and to kind of keep them inspired every single day. So I think, yes, we need to have those formal mentoring programs, but I also think we need to invest in those marigold people too and do that.
Well, and the reason why I ask you that is because I've encountered some teachers that the teaching itself, they love it or whatever, but all the things that go with it, maybe like learning how to manage up and those kind of things. So do you do some of that type of, because people forget about teachers are still employees, and they have good bosses and maybe not so good bosses, and working with the public, parents, whatever. So do you all include some of that in?
Definitely. So yeah, we definitely want to connect our new teachers with people that can help them through all the extra elements. We receive formal training on how to teach a lesson, but there's so many extra parts of the job that we don't receive formal training on ahead of time. So yes, that's definitely part of a successful, mentoring program, is to make sure that it's not just covering how to, use different teaching strategies, but also how to do all the other parts of the job as well. Definitely. Yes.
Hi. So I've heard from different people who cover education. There are probably a lot of similar stories in this room that a lot of the times our frustration is with the amount of access we get. And so I didn't know if you've been talked to from administrators at your school or from the district level about their, I guess, how comfortable they are with allowing us inside schools, and have you even reached out to reporters just on, innovations that are happening in your classroom?
I'm a huge advocate for transparency in education. So for me, I think there's two pieces to it. I think as an educator, one thing I like to do is make sure that I have a window into my classroom, whether that's a Twitter account, whether that's a website, whether that's something else like that. I want to make sure I do that. But I also want to make sure that I'm bringing people into the school as often as possible. Now, not every single teacher in every single classroom is there yet or is ready for that, but just about any school you go to, you'll find those teachers who want people from outside of the school to come in. So we need to do a better job of making sure we're connecting those teachers that are, ready to be transparent, ready to invite people in their rooms, to the people outside of the schools that want to be in there. I know personally as a teacher, sometimes it feels like nobody out there cares what's happening in my third grade classroom. So it's just, I need to do a better job finding ways to connect with those people and getting them into my room.
No, have you invited?
For me, my school, actually, a really cool thing my school has done is we've done learning walks where we invite not only parents and people who directly are part of our school community, but we also invite people, anyone who wants to come see our school. They'll actually get to walk through our school, go into classrooms, talk to kids, see learning in action. So that's something that my school personally has done in the past, Barnwell Elementary. I would love to see more of that. I think not only because it would be good for the adults, it's also really good for the kids. Because when the kids see people are coming to see them and coming to see what they're doing, it shows them that not only does their work matter, but they matter too. Yes.
Just a question. There's a book out, and I forget the author, but talking about how much screen time kids are getting in school. And we're moving to technology. We've heard all morning about 100% online testing. Even Keeneland is not interactive. It's interactive with the computer. At some point, have we gone overboard? And what the author is saying, there's a link between how much time you spend in front of a screen and mental health down the road, because we've got a kid in front of a screen, and that's it. So I just was curious, have we overdone it with technology?
I think just like anything in education, it's all about balance. So there are so many incredible things that technology can do for our students, for our teachers. My favorite use is connecting kids to the world beyond our classroom. But at the same time, I also want to make sure my kids are getting that face-to-face time, whether it's with their peers, whether it's with their teacher. So for me, it's all about balance. I personally don't want to walk into a classroom and see every single kid on a device all day long. But I do, when there's something quality that can be done with technology, absolutely, it should be a tool that we're using.
Because we've seen the rate of teenage girl suicide double in the last decade, and I think a lot of, and again, this author and a lot of school board members I'm talking to think that maybe the personalized device issue is not the solution there.
I honestly, I think it's just about balance. I know personally as a teacher, when I first started teaching, I found that I was really good at educational technology, and so that's what I focused my time on. And there were years where I had so much technology in the classroom that I actually had to kind of take a step back from that and realize that more wasn't necessarily better. I think there was a time, like you're saying, there was a time where teachers were expected to have as much technology as possible, and that was considered a good thing. And now it's more, we're looking at the quality of the technology, and it doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be all the time. So it's a great point, though. Anyone else? All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Allison. At this time, we'll have the Director of Communications from the DOE, Megan Frick, come up and give us a communications update from the department.
Hey guys, so I know most of you, and if we haven't met, I hope we have a chance to connect today. I also, every time I'm in this room, I'm pretty certain that there are people who I've talked to over email or on the phone whose faces I don't recognize, but if that's the case, we still know each other. So I just want to give you guys a quick, this will probably be the least newsy presentation of the day. I just want to give you a quick update on the logistics, how you can best get information from the DOE. So I'm your primary contact at the DOE. As most of you know, this is my desk phone, cell phone, email. I do generally tell people I spend a lot of time sitting in meetings. I don't know if that's true for anyone else. So if you ever send me an email, give me a call and can't get me, feel free to send me a text on my cell phone. I also typically don't answer calls on my cell if I don't know the number, because usually then it's someone trying to offer you a free cruise. But so if you want to send me a note today, if haven't already connected, send me a text with just your name and your media outlet. I'll save you in my phone so I know to pick up. Generally, I'll be your primary contact all the time unless I'm on vacation or something like that. I have other staff members in communications who focus on other things the majority of the time. But if I have an auto reply or if I send you in someone else's direction, these are the two people you'll likely hear from, Jacqueline and Jason. Jacqueline is on maternity leave with her newborn right now, so don't call her. You might wake up the baby. She probably wouldn't like that. So I think I accidentally skipped a slide. One thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly was things to reach out to the DOE for, and things that another agency or organization is the best contact. So if it's K-12 state level policy, if you want to interview a DOE staff member, you can reach out to us. If you want to know the rationale behind legislation that's dropped this session, you need to contact the bill sponsor. We can give you the superintendent's take on it, but we're of course not the initiator of legislation. Higher education, that's the university system of Georgia or the technical college system of Georgia. Some states, there's one Department of Education that oversees everything from pre-K through higher ed. That is not the case in Georgia. Pre-K, you can contact Reg at the Department of Early Care and Learning, or I'm happy to send you in his direction. And then private schools, I get the question a lot, who oversees private schools in Georgia? To oversimplify a whole lot, what makes them private schools is that they're not overseen by the state government. So I know that can be a little tougher in terms of contacts, and a good resource if you're trying to get in touch with a specific private or independent school, and you're not getting a response, you can try the Georgia Independent Schools Association. So they have accreditors. They're accredited by Advanced Ed, which does SACS accreditation, or by the Georgia Accrediting Commission, groups like that, but they are private schools. They're not overseen by the state government. So the question I get from reporters more than anything else other than actual news questions is, do you have a release calendar? And I usually say yes, it lives in my head. But I wanted to give you just a general overview of when to expect some of the big releases from DOE. So the financial efficiency star rating, which correlates per pupil spending with a school's CCRPI score, that'll come out this month, toward the end of the month. AP scores, which of course we don't control that release date, that's the College Board. That's typically in February, the aggregate scores. Georgia milestones you'll see in July or August of this year. Graduation rate, September or October of this year. We will be getting some NAEP scores. That's the Nation's Report Card, the big national sample test. We expect that in September or October. You'll notice that all of these are about the same time, which is really fun for me and you. SAT and ACT, we get those, of course, from College Board and ACT Inc. We don't control that release date, but it's typically in September or October. They were very late this past year, so we'll see if that happens again. CCRPI results will be in October or November of this year. And then the CSI and TSI identification, which those are the schools that are served, identified as being in need of additional support from our department. will take place following CCRPI. That is not the same thing as the turnaround eligible list, from which the chief turnaround officer selects schools to serve. But that list is also based on CCRPI scores. We don't calculate it, GOSA does, but that will also follow by necessity the CCRPI release. I did try to put together a release calendar for you guys this year. So if you go to bit.ly/DOE releases, and that is case sensitive, all it is right now is pretty much what's on this slide, but I'll update as we get closer, as I know dates. The thing that makes that tough is that we just typically, I usually don't know until a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out. I'll continue to do what I have been doing, which is sending you guys an email for big releases. When I know the release date, but this is also just a resource you can bookmark on your computer and go see what we know on what the dates are gonna be. So a couple of things that I think may be of interest in the year ahead, particularly for those of you who are local reporters that you may want to localize within their community. Our wraparound initiative, which the superintendent mentioned briefly. So we have a wraparound coordinator in every RESA region throughout the state, working with identified schools to shore up their wraparound services. So that's non-academic supports, things like clothes closets or food pantries or help applying for jobs. So we can connect you with a school in your coverage area that's doing some of that work. The best example is probably the Marietta City Student Success Center. They've done a great job with this, and we're really trying to scale that model throughout the state. As you can tell, we think Keenville is a really interesting new project, and there are some games available in all schools now. So we can connect you with a school in your coverage area that's using it. We actually had a reporter from Education Week fly down this week to see a school in Coweta County and how they were using Keenville. We just awarded START grants to 20 school districts in the state. You can see which ones at that link. These are going to help schools in rural areas either start or expand fine arts programs. They just found out that they're getting the grant, so they haven't done anything yet, but once that work begins, I think it would be really interesting to see how they're expanding their fine arts options for their students. We've awarded several rounds of fast track grants to school districts to equip their career education labs. You can see which schools in the 2 links there. I think it's really interesting. If you can get out and see what some of those schools are doing in areas like AV technology or agri-mechanics, it's so interesting to see how they're preparing kids beyond just sit and get at-a-desk education. This is in the future, but we're working on some entrepreneurship grants for schools that'll help them expand entrepreneurship education, and then just a general broad, and these are very feature-y, you can tell I was a very feature-y reporter when I was one, but is early grades computer science and the efforts we're making at the state level and the efforts a lot of schools are making to expand that computer science education into the early grades so it's not this brand new thing to students when they first encounter it at middle or high school. Quick logistics, if you are not on our press list for emails, let's get you added. There are some things that I don't send to the broader news list that I do send to press. So if you signed up just like on our website, you're probably not on the press list. If this isn't at the bottom of emails you receive from DOE, you're just on the general mailing list. So if you need to be added to the press list, just send me an email at this address and I will get you added. That's all I've got today. If you guys have any questions, you can, of course, call, text, or email me anytime. But if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Megan. At this time, we will have a presentation on school funding from Dr. Stephen J. Owens, who is with GBPI. He is the Senior Education Policy Analyst, and he's awesome. He's a Georgia Bulldog. So he's a friend of mine. In that respect, you can come on up, Dr. Owens.
Hello. So yes, I'm Stephen Owens, work for Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. My quick elevator speech on what GBPI does is that I grew up in a church where the pastor would say, if you want to see what a man worships, look at his checkbook. And that's what GBPI does, is we look at the checkbook. for the state of Georgia, and it's my job, an education analyst, which is what the biggest slice of that budget goes to, is to parse out what are we advocating for in the state, what is something that's going to push to educate all of Georgians forward. And so we'll take it kind of in three parts: a budget primer of what it looks like this year in fiscal year 2019 for the budget, how we got here, and then a few things that we're going to be looking at during General Assembly and that we will be pushing for as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization looking out for all Georgians. So for fiscal year 2019 that started in July, the budget is $9.9 billion. And when you group higher ed, decal, all the money that's going to education, it's over half of the entire state budget any given year. And this is pretty typical for other states, considering that this is a power that's pushed down from the federal government to states to be in charge of education. I bring up this chart even as we're in this position of fully funding QBE for the first time since 2002, because I think it's important to recognize the effects that this is going to have on students for a long time. So this is $9.2 billion was withheld from Georgia schools over these austerity cuts. And this is not something that just goes away once we're fully funded, because a child that was in third grade in 2010, when the state was held at $1.4 billion, is still a senior in high school today. So these are effects that will follow through with them as you have a year with less reading coaches, maybe less teachers, and with less activities that are provided by the school, like electives. This is something that will follow them. And also, as QBE is fully funded, those benefits will follow with them as well. And one of the things we're going to push for this year, and as we have for every year, is the continued commitment to fully funding QBE, which is, again, that's the Quality Basic Education Act, which dictates how much money goes to schools. And the way I describe it is fully funding QBE should be like being committed to your spouse. You can't just do it once. That's got to be a full-time commitment. So hopefully we can continue that. And I give much kudos to Governor Deal in getting us back to fully funding QBE. As the education budget has increased this year by $624 million from last year, I want to take a second to talk about where that additional money is going. So here you can see where additional money has gone traditionally as funding has increased for schools in the state of Georgia. That the largest pot of money is going to restoring austerity cuts. That's the requirement by state law of how much should go to schools, and the state getting back up to that requirement. And then natural enrollment growth takes up the next largest section, that just as we add more kids, we're required by law to educate them on the front end. And then the amount of money going to teacher retirement system of Georgia, that ends up being a large segment. And we are starting to hear some signs that the amount that the state of Georgia has to give year over year is probably going to lessen as it kind of plateaus for the requirement for TRS. So this is just what it looks like for as we increase funding. That if you hear that funding has gone up every single year since 2002 during austerity cuts, absolutely that's true, but that's an overall figure. We've grown, our student population has grown immensely in those 16 years. And so that's the per pupil amount is now just kind of getting back up to where it was in those early 2000s. One of the ways that we have been able to fully fund education is by a sort of shifting of the goalpost for how much the state is required to pay. And so we're going to hit on two major changes that happened during the recession and the years after the recession that have made it possible for Georgia to fully fund education in 2019. And the first is the amount that's going towards student transportation. You're required by law to bus every student, to provide transportation for every student that lives further than 1.5 miles away from the school. The state in 1991 was paying well over half of that amount. The increased cost of school buses and gas and replacement of buses has pushed that cost up, and Georgia is paying less and less every year. So that in 2017, we were paying 15%. One of the changes that was made during the recession was to lessen and then eliminate altogether paying for health insurance for bus driver and other non-teaching certified staff. That is a large cost, and it's not like these people are going now without health insurance, it's just that local districts are paying for it. And the reason that's important is because now, if you have a district that is high wealth, that has a lot of money that they can pull in through property tax dollars, because about 40% of all education funding comes from your local property taxes, then they are able to absorb that amount and continue providing the services they were providing before. But for our low wealth districts, and especially our rural districts where school buses are driving several miles over a large geography for half an hour, hours, they are not able to absorb that cost so much. And so that might mean less services for these schools, less electives for children in order to meet that need for school buses and school bus drivers. And that is something that we're going to continue to fight for, is restoring that funding in order to lift the burden off of local school districts. Because yes, this is a change made during the middle of a recession, but now that we are in relatively good economic times, the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. Another change I want to talk about is equalization. And I don't know if this is something that just I wasn't as aware of as I should have been, but this is an incredible aspect of the way that we fund schools in Georgia, that when Georgia's funding formula was built 2 years before I was born, they added in the ability to equalize funding. So what they did is they said, we understand that not all school districts can get the same amount of money from property taxes. That is a lot easier to afford a house in Burke County than it is in downtown Atlanta. But if you tax yourselves at the same rate that our Cobbs and Forsyths and Gwinnett's are taxing themselves, then we're going to treat you as if you have the top 10% of income for those districts. Those top 10% of districts, the state will make up the gap and will equalize to the 90th percentile. Now that was changed in the year 2000 to the 75th percentile, but it's still an incredibly equitable system at that point that provided this money that the top quarter of counties and cities could already generate on their own. In the midst of the recession in the years following, another change was made to make it the state average, but it's not the state average exactly. It's the state average after you remove the top 5 and bottom percent of districts. And so you have your wealthiest districts per student. Burke County, who knew? They have 4,000 students and a nuclear power plant. So good on them. You have your top district for wealth per student, and they are removed from that calculation in order to bring the average down lower, and then the bottom 5% are as well. So now we have state average, which is still providing money to these lower wealth districts. But that was a change made when we were not bringing in the revenues that we are today. And so this is something we're going to be pushing for to increase equalization back to the 75th percentile. This is what a map of the state of Georgia would look like if we made that change per student. Some districts would receive over $500 additional money. I mean, this is additional reading tutors. This is additional help with your music and PE. This would be felt across these smaller communities, not just in the school system, but amongst a litany of employers. This is an economic development engine.
So when you say we, who is we?
The state of Georgia. Sorry, yeah. Because this is state funds, right? I worked at the Department of Education for 3 years, and so I'm used to really taking it in my pronouns. Next thing I want to talk about, just as kind of an interest that we're going to be advocating for and that we're seeing a lot more interest in nationally, is the way that we look at finances for individual schools. So in Georgia, the school unit is the school board. So all funds are gone down to the individual school, to the school board, and they then, then they have a superintendent that's either elected or appointed who is in charge of dispersing this money equitably amongst schools. But we do not have a way to tie spendings and expenditures to school sites. That's not required by schools in the state of Georgia. Some school systems do this on their own, and that is good on them. In 2017, HB 139 was passed in order to fix this, the fact that we don't have spending down to the local school, and required reporting for 5 buckets, and I've listed them here. And this is definitely a first start to like looking at that school site level expenditures. But I want to draw your attention to a few problematic aspects of this. First, salary and benefit, this is the second bucket, salary and benefit expenditures for all staff. That's all staff. That's not just teaching staff. And so in the fourth bucket, total cost of facility maintenance and small capital projects, that also includes salary and benefits for certain staff. So if you were looking at this and the reporting the DOE is required to do to list all these, you might think I'm going to add up all 5 buckets, divide by the number of students, and that's how much is spent per student. And that is absolutely not correct. There's so much overlap between these 5 buckets that any ability to compare and contrast between schools is rendered impossible. Now, other states have gone through this and wanted to tie spending down to the school level. Maryland, Ohio's had this for years. It's possible and it is not expensive, and this is something we're going to push for in this year, because even as the best intentions are made to make sure that money is spent equally amongst schools within your system, there is always a chance for inequities to take hold. And because of national research, we know that your lower cost neighborhoods are going to get less money per school than your high wealth neighborhoods, even within the same district. And so pushing for site level expenditures would help us to see those inequities kind of in real time, year by year, instead of looking at it just as a district. Looks like you have a question.
Are you going to include federal dollars going into schools as well?
We can, absolutely.
Equalize, because the schools with low income have high amounts of federal dollars going in. So would that look, it would almost be a false representation.
You can. I mean, federal dollars is anywhere from 3 to 9% of the amount of money spent at the school. But that would still give you a lot of insight into how money is being spent at the individual school level. And as far as federal dollars are concerned, with that supplement, not supplant, it really ties down administrators of how they can use that money in a way the general operating expenditures that they're not required to. I want to talk a bit about the proposed teacher pay raises the Governor-elect Kemp had mentioned on the campaign and has since in the days leading up to his budget proposal, because we want to get our hands on a true number of how much this would cost the state in order we can understand that commitment. $5,000 to 115,000 teachers on its face is $576 million a year. The state pays an employer contribution of 21.14%. And so that would add an additional $121 million each year on the amount that the state has to pay for. So just on its face, if we just gave every single teacher $5,000 increase, that's a $700 million commitment. So state teacher hiring has increased 1.5% over the last 5 years. Let's say that continues. That means in 2024, this is a $750 million commitment. It's $750 million every year if we were to increase all teacher pay by $5,000. But it doesn't stop there. One of the things we're looking at is how does it actually happen? What are the considerations that we take into it? Because we've never just given teachers this raw dollar amount increase. If you increase the state salary schedule at its base, a $5,000 increase to a first-year teacher, because every step underneath that increases as a percentage, could be a $10,000 raise to our highest paid and most experienced teachers. My basic math on this, as we're doing some more analyses on this, is that initially, if we made a change to the state salary schedule to the base amount, that's a $912 million increase in funding for the state of Georgia education in its first year. It would be well over $1 billion by the end of this decade. That is a very large commitment to the state of Georgia, and for that reason, I want to talk just for a minute about the considerations that we need to think about if that is something that the governor wants to move forward with. First is local control. Nothing compels school districts, if they are given this additional money, to increase the pay for their teachers, especially if your teachers are paid above what the minimum salary schedule is. That isn't to say that schools won't do that, or if they're looking, tapping their fingers about how to take money from teachers. That is just a consideration that needs to go into effect. Is this just a one-time amount? Does the salaries pay schedule actually change? And how does the governor try to compel school districts to pass this money down to the teachers. Second is it's been talked about incremental steps. If instead of $5,000, would it be 4 years of $1,250 increases? After you take into account the cost of living increases and inflation traditionally, in its first year, a $1,250 increase would look like $35 a paycheck for teachers. And so they might view that as a cost of living increase. The pre-K profession is usually one that when we talk about increasing pay for teachers, that's usually not the bucket of teachers that state legislators are talking about because they're funded separately. So what does it look like to change the pay from a first-year kindergarten teacher $5,000 more compared to their pre-K counterparts? And would we see teachers leaving the profession in pre-K if they could go to school for a little bit longer and just get an additional $5,000? So that's one that we need to take into account. And then finally, how to pay for it. This is a significant commitment to teachers, and it's a significant commitment to education in the state of Georgia, and that means it demands additional revenue. And so we are going to be following very closely on where this money is going to come from, how will the state of Georgia pay for it. One of the things I've left on the table on the outside is just a one-page fact sheet on what these teacher raises look like. If you have questions, and we're going to continue this analysis as we find out some of the details, if this is something Governor Kemp wants to move forward with, and we're going to continue that analysis, feel free to contact me, but that's on the page outside, on the table outside, rather. I know we talked about tax credit vouchers during the top 10 issues, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is absolutely something that we're going to spend 2019 looking at. It seems like there's more of an appetite to understanding what's the return on investment for this $100 million every single year that we're putting into a black box, and we have no idea how the students are doing within it. We don't know how many students are using this. We don't know the schools that it's going to. It's $1 billion until the sunset provision takes effect in 2029. That we have no idea where it's going and if it's doing right by the students or by the taxpayers. One thing I do want to mention very quickly is that changes to the federal tax law, the state and local income taxes, that's that SALT changes at the bottom, that's changed the way that we view charitable giving. And so as individuals that claim this tax credit, there's a chance that this will take away their ability to then deduct those taxes on their federal taxes, So what does that change look like? If corporations are still allowed to take advantage of this tax credit, does that mean the number of organizations goes down? Do we still need to pay the student scholarship organizations the current fee that they're allowed to take in from these donations if their workload goes down because only corporations are taking advantage of this? So I released a study in December about 5 ways the state of Georgia could increase equitably funding in the state of Georgia. That is on our website right now. A lot of those recommendations I've talked about in this presentation. The teacher raise fact sheet is on the table right outside. And you can expect, as we learn a little bit more about the state and local tax exemption and those changes from the federal law, that we'll have a report on how that could impact the 2 voucher programs that we have in the state of Georgia. Any questions? Yes.
You don't take positions on legislation, say, like if there were a bill to update QBE, would you take a position on that, or would you weigh in?
Oh, we would absolutely take a position on that. Yes, we do. So as part of our nonprofit status means that we just can't endorse individual candidates or provide research for individual candidates that we wouldn't provide publicly, but we absolutely would weigh in on whether or not a 35-year-old formula would be updated. And especially because personally, that's what my doctoral research was on, is how other states undertook this huge process. And I looked at Nevada and Pennsylvania, so yes.
Did you weigh on things like the teacher raises, kind of like whether that's?
We absolutely can, but we're gonna play referee on this because budget is our middle name. And we wanna be able to say 2 things that are both 100% true. Teachers absolutely need a raise, and this would be a $700 million expense on day one. So both of those things can be true. Right now, Georgia's below the United States average for how much we pay. Our wage competitiveness, which is how much a teacher could make if they immediately left the classroom, had the same amount of credentials, 46th in the nation. So that is absolutely true, and also it's 100% true that it's a significant commitment. Yes?
So 5 ways for Georgia to fund schools fairly. So what is your difference between fair and equitable?
That's just I'm using those words interchangeably.
Not really, because I cover Fulton County Board of Education, and we get the 5 bills that are taken away, and every year when they talk about budget cuts, they basically blast the state for taking away money earned locally to send to the rest of the state.
Right.
I don't think that's fair, but it's equitable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard that. I've heard a lot of talk about that recently. So there's only really one state in the union that does that, where they actually take that money away and redistribute it, and that's in Texas, and it's called recapture. What Georgia does is they just lower the amount that they give to the, and it might be semantics, but no money is like taken from Cobb or Fulton and then redistributed. It's just not provided in that way. And so this is something that, this is the reason QBE was created in the first place, is because the state was providing a world-class education to 10% of the state of Georgia. And QBE was written as a way to get ahead of potential lawsuits, which is still not something Georgia has passed, that as a requirement constitutionally provide an education for all Georgians, it would require just less commitment to our high wealth districts and more to our low wealth districts. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Have there been any studies on, like, say there's a pay raise for students or for teachers, and is there a correlation to like increased test scores or graduation rates? Have they ever done anything like that? You know?
They have, and I would want to dive back into the data to make it a little bit more research or more recent before I.
Do you remember? I mean, I don't know.
I do not know the answer to that question. No. I've got an educated guess, but that is literally not why they pay me. But yeah, I can absolutely get you information once I've had a chance to dive into that. Any other questions? If you're wondering, like, oh, I remember somebody else from GBPI, that was Claire. I have taken her job. I am the, I know. Well, the problem is that, like, I'm the new but not improved Claire, so, like, you know, I don't want to broadcast that. Whatever the opposite of improved is, regressed maybe. So, all right, thank y'all so much.